So that's sort of the structure of the next part of the politics of race and crime. Sort of when blacks migrated to the cities in this period around World War II and thereafter, they were able to get good jobs in the manufacturing sectors because the U.S. had come out of World War II with its industrial base intact. All of Europe was devastated. And so we were enormously prosperous in the 1950s and the 1960s as we rebuilt Europe. And you could be a high school grad and you could get one of those good paying jobs with union benefits and, you know, health insurance and all of the things that people are talking about today as part of the outsourcing concerns and the migration of jobs. But that's a discussion that really began in the 1970s, because it was in the 1970s, after we had rebuilt all of those European countries and Japan, that their steel plants are now coming online and competing with American steel, and the Japanese cars are flooding the American domestic automobile market. And so, in a sense, we created our own problem by helping all those other people. And we began the process of losing our manufacturing sector. That wages stagnated in the mid-70s, and particularly in the area of cars and steel, we were facing tremendous overseas competition, which was sort of, it's a race-neutral thing, but it had a disparate impact on the blacks who were working in those particular industries in Detroit and in Cleveland and in Gary and in all of those places, you know, having good jobs and good benefits and able to afford, you know, two-parent households and all of the rest. And it was in this context of a shrinking pie that affirmative action came to the fore and began to pit the interests of blacks and the interests of blue-collar workers in this shrinking pie. At the same time that the manufacturing sector is shrinking, the information sector is growing, and all of the new jobs are going to be in service and information technologies, and that's all based on education. Now again, it's important to appreciate, in 1975, if you graduated from college, you'd only make about 25% more than somebody who graduated from high school. There just wasn't that much of a premium on education because all the people working in manufacturing had really good jobs. By 1990, the income gap had doubled. That is to say, a college grad made 100% more than a high school grad, both because the earning power of college grads had increased and the earning capacities of high school grads had decreased with the deindustrialization of the manufacturing process. So that we now have a premium on education associated with the bifurcation of the economy. And another part of the process going on in the 1970s and the 1980s is the process of efforts to desegregate schools. And that involved the busing of kids across urban school districts. And that was one of the primary impetuses, again, for the processes of white flight and the migration of whites from the city to the suburbs. And these processes, the change in the economy, the migration of whites to the suburbs, are spatially transforming the structure of American cities so that we end up with exactly what the Kerner Commission said we were going to end up with. The poor black urban core surrounded by the white affluent suburban middle. And this was associated with the increased concentration of poverty within that urban black core. And it also changed American politics. It altered the balance of politics because for the first time the white suburbs became an electoral majority. And they could satisfy their needs for public services, whether it's highways or schools or parks or police, locally. And that enabled them to become detached politically from the interests of people living in the black urban centers. And in part, we've seen in the 1980 redistricting, in the 1990 redistricting, and the 2000 redistricting, the processes of creating majority-minority urban districts, which is great for the Black caucus, but it's terrible for American democracy because it means that white suburban politicians have absolutely no interest in creating coalitions with urban black politicians or dealing with issues of urban public policy because they can get elected in their lily-white suburban districts without a care for the concerns of the broader populace. So what we see is this process of deindustrialization, of suburbanization, of bifurcation of the economy, and the emergence of the urban black underclass living in concentrated poverty. And all of this happens in a remarkably short period of time. I mean, we're talking about a 2-decade process of social change, one of the main effects of which was to reduce the pool of marriage-eligible black males. You know, as the jobs have fled, as the educational opportunities have fled, there is less reason to marry these guys who can't hold a job because there aren't any jobs there and there aren't any public transportation systems to enable people to get to the jobs in the suburbs. You know, so we saw the increase, particularly in black cities, of, you know, the rise of female-headed households with kids living in poverty. And criminal justice policies began to exacerbate black male unemployability. You send somebody to prison, you're going to adversely affect their employability down the road, and so we sort of have created this vicious cycle of destroying the human capital. And the middle class within the black community said, you know, these are terrible places to live, and they got out as fast as they could, you know, which deprived the inner cities of the traditional forms of stable human capital and seeing people going to work and all of those sorts of things. So it's in that context that crack cocaine came into the inner cities, and the use of guns as one of the tools of the drug distribution network led to the escalation of black youth homicide and the media and political response to get tough and crack down. Now, violence is, you know, I mean, well, I guess maybe you people all do look forward every year to, you know, sort of getting your copy of the Uniform Crime Reports. I mean, it's sort of, you know, maybe we're the only people in the world who, hot damn, I got my new issue of the UCRs. Because when you look at the UCR, Carol, don't you? I mean, that's just, it's, you know, it's like getting the Christmas catalog from Sears. It's, anyhow, you know, when we look at patterns of crime rates, you know, it was basically going up from the mid-60s to around 1980, and then it sort of dipped in the mid-80s, and then it spiked again in the later 80s and early 90s. And when I talk about crime rates, I'm really just focusing on homicide, because homicide was really the tail that wagged all of the issues of public policy. And it wasn't just homicide, it was homicide by black kids using guns. Because police have always arrested black people for violent crimes at a rate about 5 times the rate at which they've arrested white folks. But between 86 and 93, the black youth homicide rate tripled. And the gun homicide involvement among juveniles more than quadrupled. So everything in public policy was driven by this very, very narrow slice of the crime pie, of guns in the hands of young black men, and all of the excess homicide was concentrated within this urban black male population as a byproduct of the crack industry. So that it's the confluence of race and guns and homicide that fanned the public panic and provided the political incentive to exploit white suburban fear to crack down on super predators. Now, there were all of those Republicans, I will use the R word, running around in the early 90s talking about this coming wave of super predators. And we were all going to be awash in a bloodbath. Actually, they predicted the bloodbath for right this year when this demographic bulge came of age. Now, I mean, the reality is, of course, that crime has dropped off the map. Juvenile crime has dropped off the map. You know, we've got half the homicide. We've got less homicide today. We've got less crime today than we had in the 1960s. I mean, my dean keeps threatening me I'm going to have to teach tax because there's not enough crime left to talk